Hi, I'm here today with Christine Schader, and I'm Kate Olson, the host of Embrace Change with Kate, and we're going to do a soul talk today. And the soul talk is going to be on worry and how to stop doing that. I think it's something that everybody has experience with, and some more than others. And when people tell you not to worry, it's sometimes like, how do I do that? So Christine is a coach like me, and I met her on Facebook. First, I noticed her beautiful art and asked her to post it in Creative Friends, and then I noticed she could write really well. So I asked her about posting one of her something she'd written on our guest blog, and that's going to be posted soon. And then with all of her posts on Facebook, I found that I was relating to a lot of them. So even though I've only met her on Zoom, I am kind of starting to feel like I know her, like maybe she's an old friend or something. So we're going to try to have a soul talk here on worry and see where that goes. And I'm going to let Christine introduce herself because I probably didn't say everything she'd like to say.
Well, hello, Kate. Thank you so much for having me today. It's such a pleasure to be here. I am an inspirational speaker and an author. I also own a financial planning firm in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And I wrote a book on happiness, and I actually have a little chapter about worry. So I'm thrilled to be here today and share with you what I can on that. So did you have specific questions for me?
No, I'm not going to ask questions. We're just going to talk. So I actually was having a little worry experience just before our talk today, being as our talk was actually supposed to be a half an hour ago. I had decided to go run an errand and got stuck in traffic, so I was worrying about getting back here on time when I finally just decided to stop worrying and pull over and send Christine a message and ask if we could do it a little later. And she said yes. So I got to stop worrying about that. So, but I know worrying is, I think, maybe one of the biggest problems today, because stress not only doesn't feel good and is kind of a waste of time, but it actually causes all kinds of health problems for people. So learning how not to worry or not to spend so much time worrying, because I'll have to say I haven't quite mastered that myself yet, but I do worry much less than I did in the past. One of the reasons why I asked Christine to talk today was when I was thinking about asking her to do a soul talk. On that particular day, she had a post about worry. And so it made me think about regard. And then I thought about what she does for a living aside from the coaching. And she talks to people about money. And I thought, money happens to be one of the things that people worry about most. And so I bet she has some experience rather other than just her own personal worry with, how people deal with worry. What do you think about that, Christine?
Oh, you hit it right on the nail, right on the head. I'll tell you, I work primarily with wellness departments at hospitals and colleges. And the reason I go in there, and I teach two programs primarily for them, a financial wellness program and a happiness program. And the main reason they have me come in is they recognize that the number one stress in America is financial stress. So if somebody like I can come in and teach some basic financial foundational courses and also that happiness course, what kind of sets my firm apart from the average financial advisor out there. I do hold some of the highest credentialing in the field, but what really sets us apart is we're known as the soul side of money. And I learned a long time ago that if I could tap into what brings my clients joy and happiness and develop their financial plans around that, they would be wildly successful. And so we tap into the psychology behind money all the time. And as is everything in life, it's how your brain is wired, right? Are you wired? Have you learned those skill sets, those mind shifts, those money shifts that you can do in your world? And so we start a lot with that. Often I'll hear people say, well, I'm broke. And I'm telling them, you are not broken. I don't want to hear you're broke, right? Let's start with that mind shift right there. The same thing with worry. People are like, I am a worrier and I am this. You're not a worrier. You're not a worrier. You have worries sometimes. Right? And so we have to first of all recognize when we're doing the worrying and create the pause in the brain so we can have another thought, any other thought. But so often we just let our brains hijack us and go through this crazy little loop that it likes to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of beliefs around worrying. My mother was a big worrier, and it wasn't that she wasn't worrying about nothing, but she wasn't really accomplishing anything with that worry like everyone else. And so my sister and I were both exposed to that, and I, not totally, but more so than she, resisted it, and she embraced it. A few years ago when she was going through worries, and she always worried, I was talking to her about how it affected her health because she was also having health problems at the time. And she was just very adamant with me that she had to worry, because if she wasn't worrying, she felt like she wasn't doing anything.
Yes.
And I'm happy to say that I talked to her the other day, and she's also been having some health problems. And she told me about realizing that her emotions were affecting her, and that the particular emotion that she was talking about now was getting upset or angry because she's the president of her dog show association. And she realized that when she got upset about something in the meeting, that she actually felt sick the whole night. And that is actually what worry does to you too, and how it has the negative effects on your health.
For sure, for sure. And there's lots of little skills that people can learn. The number one thing I try to share with people is don't ignore it, right? So often people are like, well, I'm just not going to think about that. But as you know, what you resist actually persists, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm always like, okay, recognize that it's coming in. I love this quote I read once. It said, I worry about everything and it's working because 90% of the time those things don't happen, right? And I'm like, oh, okay. So recognizing when you're worrying, the quicker you can get in the skill set of recognizing that it's happening, and then actually embracing it a little bit. Hey, I'm worrying. being able to pause, that will allow you enough time to pause the brain. One of my very quotes of all time is by Viktor Frankl, and he wrote The Meaning of Man. He was a Holocaust survivor of not one, not two, but 3 Holocaust camps. And he's known as the father of a branch of psychology. And his quote, and this is not verbatim, I don't have it in front of me, but it's basically, between stimulus and response, there lies a space. And in that space lies your freedom. And I always say, in that space lies your happiness as well. So between something happening to you and how you choose to respond to that, there's actually a space. And people have not been taught how to expand that space so that they can have another thought. So very often what they'll do is they'll go down the what if train. What if this happened? And then what if that happened? And what if this happened? And so I like to teach them to use what if, but for the positive. Well, okay, what if that happened? Well, what if this happened? And I'll say something positive. What if this is the best thing that ever happened to you? Or what if this is the result of that? Or what if this happens? And so we can play that game. But for some people, I'll actually use their own what ifs against them. And I'll say, okay, well, Kate, tell me about that. What if that did happen? Then what? And then they'll go a little further and they'll go, well, then this would happen. Okay, what if that happened? Then what? And then they'll go, and then we'll just keep going down the road to the very end. And in the end, they still realize they're safe from
Yes.
harm. You know, they're alive.
There's actually another question that you can ask yourself too, and it has to do with mindfulness. And, you know, is this happening now?
I love it.
Because it isn't happening now. And so if it isn't happening now, you don't have to worry about it. And then the thing is that if that, whatever you're worrying about or whatever you would worry about does happen, we usually don't worry then. We act. We do what we need to do to deal with the situation. So, like me, both my sister and I inherited this also from my mom. Although my mom was a big worrier, she was very good at dealing with things when they were actually happening. She stayed very calm and was very resourceful. And my sister and I are both that way too. So I have learned that whatever does happen, I am going to be able to deal with. So why spend all that time worrying about it?
It's such a waste of energy. And if we can shift that energy to problem solving instead of problem creating in our brains, we move through that so much quicker. You can also, and I'm sure you, of all people, are very aware of this, and you can enlighten us more than I can, you can anchor your physiological response. And so I learned a long time ago, I have 2 master certifications in hypnotherapy as well, and I learned a long time ago that if I can get my physical body in a very calm state, a very deep state, and then anchor that, then I can use that anchor for me in situations. And my physiological body will literally go back to that restful space, and then I'm able to think through.
Exactly. And then there's the argument that people will make, and my son has made this argument to me, is, well, I have to worry because while I'm worried, I'm thinking about all of the solutions that I'm going to, you know, if I didn't worry, then I wouldn't be thinking about what I'm going to do if this happens. But that's not true. That's a fallacy. You can think of solutions to prevent something that could potentially happen without worrying. It
Exactly.
doesn't be a tense, worrisome thing. You can very calmly sit down and look at all the scenarios that you could implement to prevent a certain thing that you don't want. But if you just worry, what you're more likely doing is moving yourself more in the direction of that thing happening. Because what we focus on subconsciously is what we usually, create. We aren't, most of the time when you're doing it, you don't know that you're moving yourself toward that eventual end. But if someone is looking at it from the outside, they can see that. They can see that, she did this and this and this, and that led exactly to that thing that she was afraid would happen.
Well, because as you know, what we focus on grows, right? What we resist persists. And so we create it. I love to share with people how to develop and practice and develop MFIs, I call them, mind freak out interrupts. So when your mind is freaking out on you, how do you interrupt it in the moment, right? What are some of the things that we can do to pause the brain so we have an opportunity to have another thought? Distraction, number one, right? Do something that can distract yourself. Go for a walk. I actually pretend I have a pause button in my brain. Push the pause button. Do a plot twist. Call a friend. Immerse yourself in something. So if you have some kind of hobby or task or something that you can go and focus on that, just so you can create that bigger pause so that you can have a way of looking at this situation in another way. So MFI skills are important. They're important because without them, your brain just keeps looping.
Yes, when you are actually in that stress, anxiety cycle, breaking that cycle is exactly what you need to do. And what is happening in your brain exactly is that the two hemispheres of your brain have disconnected. And in order to reconnect so that you can think, because you're actually not thinking at that point, there are some tools that you can use, like breathing is one of them. Just deep breaths. Okay, another one is anything that does cause the two hemispheres of your brain to connect. And that would be something like throwing a ball back and forth from one hand to the other. Even going like this. And that tapping is something that people use, but I've had people tell me that I did tapping and it didn't help. And that's because the part of the tapping that they were doing was probably just engaging one side of their brain. But if you do this, if it crosses the center line of your brain, then it's going to interrupt that cycle. And that doesn't get to the triggers of that anxiety. You need to work on that, but it does break the cycle for that minute. And interestingly, the more times we break that cycle, it starts to form different patterns in our brain. And if different patterns get formed, we're less likely to go to that same worry cycle.
Exactly. I love it. So another tool that they can use is to name it to tame it, right? So name what's happening. And very often I like to have folks describe it with sensational words. So instead of I felt, worrisome or anxiety or fear, well, explain that to me. Oh, my heart was, pounding and my hands were sweating. And just that also gets them from that creation portion of their brain to that frontal lobe, right? Which gives them that opportunity to pause. Anything that they can do to create an MFI, a mind freak out interrupt, in the moment so they can have another thought.
Yes. And once you realize that whatever you're, spending that worry on is not happening now.
Yes.
And you can take a deep breath and think about it. Sometimes you can just see the solution.
Exactly, exactly. And then also we mentioned fear, and what I find with fear physiologically, it's nearly identical in the body in a response as excitement. And so very often we'll say, oh, I'm so scared. One of my clients will tell me, I'm so scared. And I'm like, oh, you're so excited, right? Just a little mind shift in how we're relating to that. It's the same thing with, I have to do this. Well, you get to do this, right? Your brain then produces a different chemistry, which actually helps with the calming effect.
Yeah, and some things that'll work. I can't see it working on others, but there's probably something else that'll work for those. Like, okay, I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to pay my bills. Oh, you're so excited. You're going.
Oh, yeah. No. I'm thinking more like public speaking or, those type of things. It's funny though that I'm afraid to I can't pay my bills thing. Obviously I work with that quite a bit. And money, it's interesting because as everything in this world, everything is energy, and money has an energy to it as well. And when my clients are strictly focusing on debt, they really truly invite more debt in their world. And so there are mind shifts that we do with that. We choose to focus on financial freedom. When I teach a class, Raising Financially Responsible Children, and I teach my clients, I say, look, again, don't tell your children you're broke. You're not broken. We're choosing not to spend our money right now because this is what's more important to our family, right? So using those words and getting that creation going in it, and then the practicality, just learning how to properly put together a spending plan and how to properly manage the bills. We're not taught that either in schools anymore. And so that's a skill that people are missing in this world. And so teaching them some basic financial education is important too.
Yes, and also the fear over that has really been, ballooned into something bigger than it sometimes is, because it happens to people all the time that they go through some kind of a financial setback and they aren't able to pay their bills. That fear and the stigma and everything around it is built into something way bigger than it is, not just by them, but by society in general. And what really does happen when you can't pay your bills? Well, sometimes devastating things do happen, but in more cases than not, if you can remain calm and think of solutions, not being able to pay a bill or some bills for a short period of time is not going to have those devastating effects that you imagine. It just isn't. It happens to people all the time. They survive it, get past it, and go on to live happy lives.
Exactly. And once we can separate that, because as you mentioned, there is such a stigma to it. But once we can separate this piece of paper, this currency is literally paper, right? Let's not give this paper so much power over our happiness or so much power. And they've proven time and time again, there's actually a scientific formula for happiness. And people, I'll ask them, what percentage of your happiness do you think actually comes from your money? Right? Because my clients come in all the time and say, well, if I just had more money, then I'd be happier. And I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about that. Let's look at that. What percentage of your happiness comes from there? And then I share with them this scientific formula. I'm like, okay, they have proven time and time again that once your basic needs are met, once you have a roof over your head and food on the table, that your money has less than 10%, your circumstances has less than 10% influence on your happiness level.
Yes.
Right?
We've seen the people that have lots and lots and lots of money and still they're not happy.
Oh, over and over again, right? Over and over again. It's interesting too that when I share with people how their brains work, so I'm a little bit of a neuroscience nerd and I really like studying it, and my book is kind of written around neuroscience. When I share with people how their reticular activating system works, and how what you basically, after keeping you alive, so your reticular activating system, of course, is your filter, as you know, system for what we pay attention to. So we take in millions of bits of information, and your conscious brain doesn't process all of that. So your reticular activating system filters out and tells it what to pay attention to. After keeping you alive, that's the primary function, right? Just keep you alive. After that, you pretty much set the parameters on that, you know? So you will see millionaires who have lost their fortune over and over again, and they're millionaires again, because their reticular activating system goes back and starts paying attention to those opportunities now available to them. So when we're working with stress and financial stress, if we can rewire or redevelop those pathways, as you were mentioning, in the brain, to where they're going to find those proactive solutions instead of the reticular activating system focusing on all the negative and bringing it. We also see people who win lotteries. You know, constantly we see lottery winners or people who inherit. Do you know the average inheritance and windfall is gone, you know, regardless of the size, within 18 months? Because people aren't accustomed to how to handling that. They're using their same money skill set that they had before the inheritance or the windfall. And basically, I find money as an amplifier. If you weren't very good with money before you had money, you're probably not going to be very good with large sums of money. And yet people still think that's what's going to bring them happiness. And so when we kind of break this down, this paper, this currency that we use, and we share with people, look, it's paper. Right? Now let's rewire the brain. Let's get your brain to pay attention to building it instead of the debt, and enhancing. You know, what you appreciate appreciates. And so we do a lot of that in our firm.
And also attitudes and beliefs around money can make you happy or they can make you unhappy. And that's regardless, as you said, of, you know, what the level of money that you have is. I know someone who had a very, I guess, traumatic upbringing around money. And they have a lot of ideas and attitudes based on that upbringing. And even though they have done well enough for themselves that they were able to retire almost 15 years early, and they're fairly secure and stable, they have those attitudes that made them unhappy as a child of having little money still affect them and make them unhappy.
Yes, it follows through. You know, they carry their baggage, their money story with them. You know, I'm always asking people, well, what's your money story? Tell me your relationship with money. Where are we going with that? And developing the skill set to kind of turn that around. There's a great book out called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks that talks about the comfort zone. This is another thing that I find people struggle with when it comes to money and happiness and stress and all of that. And a lot of people don't understand. They understand homeostasis. You know, homeostasis is trying to find balance within the body. So if it's really warm, your body starts perspiring, it tries to cool it off, right? Because we have a set thermostat for our body. But we also have a thermostat when it comes to our comfort level with money. And when we have that set and something happens, and maybe a couple, one of them loses a job, so the thermostat goes down, well, they immediately come back up to that same level within a very short period of time. Again, the millionaires who've lost gone bankrupt 3 or 4 times, they've lost it all, they've come back to that comfort zone because that's where their comfort zone is set. And for some people, when they're trying to break through that comfort zone, that upper limit problem starts happening, and those limited beliefs start sabotaging them and bringing them back down to where they're comfortable again.
Yes, and it works in a lot of different ways. Like, okay, somebody who feels that They just barely have enough money to pay their bills. That, if they believe that, no matter how much money they make, they will always only have just barely enough money to pay their bills. So it's funny how that works.
Well, it's just fascinating how it works in every aspect of our worlds, right? In our relationship worlds, what you focus on grows. I tell people all the time, look, if you're going to focus on the dirty laundry, you're going to have a marriage full of dirty. If your partner comes home, takes his socks off and throws it on the floor, and that's all you can focus on, you're going to have a relationship full of dirty laundry, right? Instead, if you can shift that and focus on those things that you really admire and appreciate in your partner, that's what you're going to notice, right? It's whatever where your focus goes, that's what grows. And it's in every single aspect of our worlds.
Yes, exactly. So getting back to worry.
Yes.
Yes, if you focus on worry, you will worry more, and whatever you're worrying about, you will amplify or get more of that in your life. So once you know that, there's still, the process that you need to go through to get yourself to stop doing it, because it's pretty wired in, so we do have, it isn't just like, oh, I have to stop worrying and we do it. It just doesn't work that way. You actually have to, as you said, try to think other thoughts, try to focus in a different place. And some people, okay, I get clients that in their work life, they'll approach problems very differently than in their personal life. Like, okay, at work, if they encounter a problem, they're going to go through a process of looking for solutions. But in their personal life, they don't go through that same process. They see problems as obstacles that they can't get past. So I try to set that scenario in their work life. Okay, if you were at work and you came across whatever problem applies to their work, would you say, oh no, things are never going to work, it's impossible? No, you wouldn't. No. Why do you do that in your personal life?
And, it's fascinating how we put on these different personas, right? We carry these personas. So I'll very often have people actually bring something, like maybe they wear their glasses at work, and they usually only wear their glasses at work. Okay, let's put those glasses on here, right? Let's change your persona a little bit here. Let's give you a little
much better.
And now you're clear. You're seeing much better, as you said, right? You're clearer, and it's like, okay, let's try that on a little bit, and then wiring that in for their home life.
Yeah, some people, the belief behind that is, maybe I can be confident at work, but personally, I'm a mess.
Exactly.
And that's kind of ridiculous. How can you be confident at work and personally be a mess? If you can be confident, you can be confident in your personal life.
Exactly.
Why not do it for you if you can do it for, some employer?
Exactly. And sometimes they can't do it at work either. And so I will have them make decisions for that person they love the most in the world. So very often that's a child, and I'd be like, okay, well, how would you respond to that for your daughter? Right? And they would be, oh, well, I would never let them tolerate this or that, or, oh no, we would do this. Okay, why don't we do that for ourselves?
Yes, that is very true. Oftentimes we can be, more of an advocate for somebody else, and then we fail to do it for ourselves.
Yes.
So, So we are getting close to the end of our time we set. We could probably talk about this for a long time, but so what would you want to say as your last comment to anyone who's worrying a lot?
I think I would leave with that this isn't going to change overnight. If you're a worrier and you've built that trait in from a very early age, it's not going to change overnight. So be gentle with yourself, and it's going to take practice. And the more you do it, the more you develop your mind freak out interrupters and you apply them, or your tools in your toolbox to help with this. The more you identify your triggers and put the process in place, then that's what actually rewires the brain. And it takes practice. So to practice it over and over again and find that skill set that works really well for you. So for me, distraction's my number one thing. I love to get distracted, right? And if that means I'm distracting myself with art, or sometimes it's Netflix, right? Whatever it is, if I need to distract myself for a period of time so that I can break away from this loop I've created in my brain, then I can look at the situation with fresh eyes.
And also, it's self-love and realizing what your strengths are, like realizing that you are competent and you can and will deal with, whatever situation presents itself. And rather than, spending all that time on what ifs, because you're not gonna do that what if. You're gonna deal with it.
Exactly, absolutely.
So I've enjoyed talking with you as always, and I hope we gave some insight to anyone who listens to this. And so thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. It was such an honor to be here. I'm so humbled to be able to speak with you on your Soul Talk series, and it was totally my pleasure. Thank you, thank you.
Okay, well, keep up all the great things that you're doing, and we'll talk again.
Thank you, Kate. Have a great evening.
All right, you too.